Like many of you, this weekend I have been playing the Duskbloods, and I have a lot of thoughts on this game. Just off rip, I really enjoyed this game. The PvP aspects of this game were incredibly engaging. It felt way more competitive than I thought it was going to. But I have a lot of thoughts, primarily around where it fits within the kind of FromSoft canon of games. The primary takeaway of this game is it's not a Souls-like, and I think there will be a lot of debate about what genre this game fits into. There is already a lot of debate about what the Souls-like genre is, and I think it doesn't really matter. I think genres are kind of irrelevant. Largely speaking, as long as you have an understanding of what a game is, genre is largely irrelevant. But that's why it's important to define this game not as a Souls-like, because I don't think it fits into any one genre neatly. And I think the primary reason that it's not a Souls-like is because Souls-likes have a pretty significant relationship with death. I think in-game death and in-game difficulty and the ways that those two elements work in tandem are a very important aspect of the Souls-like genre. Whereas in this game, death, your character dying, you dying as a player, is of no real consequence, and I'll get to that later. But first I want to have kind of a brief overview on what the Duskbloods is. There's a lot of videos out there kind of explaining it in full detail, but I'll give like a brief overview just to kind of like add as a footnote for the rest of this video. Also, just to preface, I played the network test, the like public, I mean it was closed, but it was open to the public in a sense. Network tests, I did record footage, but the footage that you will be seeing alongside this video is not my own, because as a part of the agreement for playing this is you're not allowed to publish any recordings that you made of the game. So all of this is B-roll that is available via other platforms. So what is the game? It was originally described as a PvPvE game, and I think that is like somewhat accurate. Like it is, there are PvP elements when there are PvE elements, but the PvP part is interesting. So essentially the structure of a single match, a match can last up to 20 to 25 minutes, and it is in 4 rounds. So the first round is there are 8 players put out into the world, and you go and explore and you level up your character, and the primary goal of the first 3 rounds is to gather virtue. And virtue is gathered in many different ways, but largely just a kind of vague understanding of what virtue is it's the score of your character, right? So you do different tasks, you beat bosses, you pick up certain collectibles, you engage in certain restricted PvP combat areas, and you gain virtue. The higher your virtue, the more likely you are to move on to the next round. So the first round is essentially free. I think it's like introductory. You can level up your character, you can gather virtue, and then you are guaranteed to move on to the second round. From the second round, I believe it's the top 6 players with the highest virtue will then move on to the third round, and then the top 3 players with the highest virtue will move on to the final round. In this network test, the final round was essentially just a 3 players fighting each other until one of them is left. Throughout the game, you're engaging in PvE boss fights. There are like mobs lingering around the world that you can kill, and you can get upgrades, and you can get virtue and things like that. And you gain virtue in various different ways. So you can gain it just relatively passively. If you're just killing a lot of the kind of standard enemies around the world, the top 3 players who have the highest number of kills within the world will gain some virtue passively throughout. The same with collectibles. So if you've collected the most items, you will gain virtue. Kind of later in the rounds, there are ritual sites, and you engage with looks like a golden crucifix essentially, and you gain virtue that way. Or if you kill players within the ritual sites, you gain virtue that way. So there are lots of different ways to gain virtue which cater to different playstyles. So if you don't want to engage in PvP combat, you can largely avoid it until the end. And I think the structure of this game is really interesting because it pulls from lots of different genres of games in various different ways. So when this game was first announced, the PvPvE descriptor is one that is largely given to extraction games. And this was also given weight because an interview with Hidetake Miyazaki, he said that he was interested in the ways that games like Escape from Tarkov work. So people kind of assumed that this was going to be an extraction game. And it's not an extraction game, right? You're not going in, finding items, and then leaving the game. The goal is to win. Whereas in an extraction game, the goal isn't necessarily to win. It's to go in, gather up items, complete missions, and get out. However, this does take elements from extraction games in that there are multiple players on a single map focusing on different individual tasks. Each player is doing different things while either electing to engage in combat with each other or not. In the broad world, engaging in combat with other players is completely fruitless. Like, there is no point in doing it, apart from if you're a dick and you just want to grief people, which does happen. There are reasons to engage with PvP, but most of the time, in most instances, there is no point. Unlike an extraction shooter where you can kill people and then you get their loot. So the similarities with extraction games come in the fact that it's multiple people engaging in multiple different tasks at the same time. The thing that differentiates this game from an extraction game is the fact that there can only be one victor. The goal of the game is to win, is to be the only player left standing at the end of this game, right? So that then makes you think of battle royale games. So could this be considered a battle royale? In a sense. So to bring it back to another FromSoft game, Elden Ring Night Rain, people were like, is this a battle royale? Because it has the flame circle enclosing. This game doesn't have that element. It just has time, right? So time runs out, and if you haven't collected enough virtue by the end of a round, you die and you're out, right? So that's the battle royale nature of the game. However, when comparing it to battle royales, an interesting thing is, obviously, in a battle royale, if you engage in PvP combat and you kill someone or you die, that person or you are out of the game. That, like I mentioned earlier, is not the case here. Engaging in PvP combat in most instances is pointless. I feel like I've said that a million times. And I think that should be stressed when talking about the PvPvE description for this game. So this makes me think a lot of another Nintendo game, which is why this is interesting, coming out exclusively on the Nintendo Switch 2. The closest comparison I can give it to is the knockout tour mode in Mario Kart World, right? So in that game, you're racing across 4 stages or whatever it is, and at the end of each stage, the last X number of players are knocked out, right? And it's essentially the same here, apart from you're not racing. I suppose you're racing to develop your virtue score or whatever, but it's the same idea. But of course, as mentioned earlier, the virtue score is not just the case of beating other players. It is a case of gathering items and doing bosses and things like that. However, the final section of the game, I think it's called the Grail, is purely PvP. That's 3 players fighting against each other in PvP combat, purely PvP combat. And the ways in which you engage with the game up to that point, how much you've leveled up your character, how much virtue you have, weighs up how powerful you are in that instance. However, there are balances that come into play. So you have the equivalent of Estus flasks. You build up a bunch of them throughout the main run. You are reset to 2 for this final fight, 2 per life. You also have 2 lives. So each player has to die twice to be knocked out, and the person left standing with at least 1 life wins. And this, again, back to connecting it to Nintendo games, this last fight kind of feels like Super Smash Bros. In a sense, right? It's another game that involves a kind of chaotic skirmish to diminish the lives of another player while maintaining your own lives, right? It doesn't necessarily play exactly like Super Smash Bros. Those games are, I would say, much more intricate in their fighting mechanics and things, but just something to compare it to in terms of the way that winning works, the way that taking lives off another player works. And then another genre that it pulls from within the structure of the game is roguelike games. So I wouldn't consider this a roguelike as a whole. However, it pulls a lot from roguelike. So you're leveling up your character within the confines of a single run or a single match. And when you defeat a boss, you can pick up an item. And then there's a pick 2 system, which you can choose to level up your weapons or increase damage, decrease cooldowns, increase the number of times you can use certain abilities, things like that. And I think that's why this game is so interesting and you can't put it into a specific genre, is because it takes elements from extraction games. It takes elements from battle royale games. It takes elements from roguelike games. It's inspired by various different games in primarily Nintendo's canon and brings them together within the package of a FromSoft game, which is incredibly weird and incredibly interesting because it isn't a Souls-like game, right? All of these elements together can make a Souls-like, right? I'm not saying that it's impossible for a Souls-like game to be inspired by extraction games and inspired by battle royale games and various Nintendo games and roguelike games. But I think that the most important element of Souls-like games is the significance of death and the impacts of your character dying, whether that's setting you back 10 minutes and you have to do a ridiculous run back, or corpse running, having to go back to your body and pick up your souls or your runes or whatever. Death has high significance in Souls-like games. In this game, death is of little to no consequence. As I say, that is not to say this game isn't hard. This game has Souls-level difficulty in its bosses and various different things, but death is inconsequential broadly speaking. And I think that's what makes this game interesting, but it's also the reason why a lot of Souls players will bounce off this game, I think. Because like the mainline single player Souls games are much slower games. They're much more, in the way that the player engages with them, they're much more thoughtative games. You have to learn the boss's patterns and the way that your character swings in certain ways, and kind of learning about how iframes work on certain dodges and the right time to dodge and various things. I don't feel like that learning the intricacies of bosses is not so important here, because you have other players with you. I think essentially your goal is to become stupid strong so that you can win the final fight. And you can just avoid bosses to do that, but the bosses themselves, if you're fighting them one-on-one, it's a classic Souls fight. And they are hard. Like 1v1, they are hard. They're fast and they're chaotic and they close gaps and they have projectiles and things like that. But when you're playing with 8 other players taking on a single boss, they have a hell of a health bar. They take quite a long time to beat a lot of the time, but it does become kind of trivial at times. But they're also interesting because certain players will get killed during the fight, and then it's just you against the boss, and you have to kind of, it's then kind of it's surviving until another player comes back, because when you're in, especially some of the bigger boss fights, other players in the area will be notified of the boss fight happening, and then they can just teleport to that boss fight, which I think is a really interesting mechanic. It's a really interesting game to have as a Switch 2 exclusive, and I think that it's interesting when comparing it to other Nintendo games and Switch 2 exclusive games, because the majority of Switch exclusive games, we're thinking like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Super Mario Odyssey, things like that. They're consumable in small bursts. So let's use Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as an example. They're like big, kind of sprawling RPG adjacent games, but despite the fact that they are massive 100+ hour stories, they are pick up and play games, right? You can save wherever, and you can pick it up and you can just do one Korok seed puzzle or one shrine or whatever. They have little bits that you can do that kind of aid themselves to the handheld form factor of the Switch. I personally consider the Switch to be primarily a handheld console, and I think a lot of people the same. It's a portable console that you can put on your TV, and I think the games reflect that largely. When you compare them to more sprawling nature of the first-party games on PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, the games are much more pick up and play in their design. And this game almost feels like that. Like it's lots of little things that you have to do, but they are all within the confines of a 20, if you reach the end, a 20 to 25 minute match. Think of another PvP multiplayer game on the Switch, like Splatoon, for example. Splatoon matches are only ever like 5 minutes long. They're really short. You can pick it up, play one match, and put it down and carry on doing whatever you're doing. Whereas this, you do need to get to play one game. They feel quick because it's exciting, but they are 20 to 25 minute long matches. And I think that's the choice to have it as a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. It's really interesting from that perspective as well. And also with all of the intricacies of the game, a lot of it will be kind of relatively familiar to people that have played Souls games, but there is a humongous tutorial. The tutorial itself takes like an hour plus to beat, which was quite annoying in the 4-hour time slots that this network test was structured in. But obviously this is potentially bringing in an entirely new audience, the Nintendo audience, into the FromSoft canon, if you will. Whereas before, the only game that is out on the Nintendo Switch within FromSoft's library is the Dark Souls remaster. And I imagine a lot of people who have Switches probably have not played that game. I can't imagine it's that popular on the Switch. I could be wrong, but I can't imagine that is the most popular way to play that game. And people who have Switches, it's not going to be the first game that they're going to pick up on the Switch. So I think that it's a really weird choice. Having a FromSoft exclusive on the Nintendo Switch is a really weird choice. But I think because this game is so different from other FromSoft games, I'm going to put a little caveat here. I haven't played Night Rain, so I don't know how similar it is to Night Rain. My understanding is it's the most similar to Night Rain than another game. But the fact that it's so different from any other FromSoft game makes the Switch 2 kind of the perfect place for it. Because there has been a lot of discourse and a lot of discussion about why isn't this a classic single-player FromSoft RPG, like a full-length single-player Souls-like game? And I think that, to put it simply, I think it's just an experiment. and it's different. And I don't think it would necessarily be, I don't know, I don't know if it would necessarily be received well if it was on everything. That's probably nonsense. I think that the fact that the game is so different and is also being released on Switch 2 as an exclusive, those two factors go hand in hand. I think this is the most Nintendo-ass FromSoft game that has come out because it's, I don't know, there's a fucking quadruple jump, a triple jump, where you jump and then you can jump 3 more times, so that's like a quadruple jump. There's insane movement and things like that. It's hard to put into proper words, but it feels like a Nintendo game, some sense. And I've expressed earlier that it's comparisons to Mario Kart World and Super Smash Brothers and things like that. And like, you know, those are mechanical comparison. It's really hard to put it into proper words because I'm speaking off the top of my head. If I was writing this down, then maybe I could speak more fluidly. But there's got to be someone out there that agrees with me that this feels like a Nintendo game in some capacity. Like, I think I was watching Vati Vidya's his video when they first released the trailer last year, and I think Miyazaki even said that the like rat bird thing with the yellow symbols on him, he is kind of like a quirky character because it's coming onto Nintendo. Like it's like their version of a Nintendo style mascot. I just think it's all very, very interesting, and this whole video might have been completely incoherent, and I apologize if that's the case. But I just had lots and lots of thoughts about this game. If you had the opportunity to play the game, if you had the opportunity to get into any of the tech tests, tell me what you thought down below. I think this is going to be an incredibly divisive game, but I really like it. I think that people that will enjoy this game are going to really, really love this game. I think people going into it thinking this is a FromSoft Souls-like game will be disappointed because it's just not what it is. It's a weird multiplayer game, and I've never ever played a game like it before. I've never played a game with this structure before that takes elements from so many different genres before. So yeah, let me know what you think. If you didn't get the opportunity to play this game, or you have no interest in playing this game, tell me why. If you are interested in playing this game, tell me why. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously, we don't know when it's actually coming out, but I think this might be a day one for me. I really, really like it. And there's also like a ton of things that I haven't talked about the game. But there's lots of things that I wanted to talk about, but I've already been talking for about 25 minutes. So I'm going to stop now. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Like the video if you enjoyed me rambling, and subscribe if you want to. Hopefully, maybe I'll do more rambling. This is the first time I've done this, so who knows.